Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Advancement Center, and welcome to, once again, the continued reading of The Magic of Life by Robert Young. And I continue with chapter 40. Willie was finding it difficult to contain his excitement, and it was at this time that he knew beyond any doubt that he could never continue working alone. He had arrived back at the deserted boat shed, but had nobody at all to tell about the wonderful things he could see in his mind, the exciting things that had happened to him while he was with young Bill. He had never thought about Bill Summers being exciting, but wow, what had happened to him during those few hours with Bill was something that he could not contain. He rushed back into the house and went to pick up the radio so that he could transmit to John, but found that he had no radio. He had forgotten all about what had happened earlier. He had even forgotten about the cyclone and the damage that it had caused. It had all gone, and the work that he had put into replacing half of the moorings and repairing the shed doors had gone. He had forgotten. He then realized that he missed the interaction with John, his partner of so long. He realized how stubborn he had been and how fixed in his visions. He also realized how little he had listened to John when John had told him that they needed to change direction. He had thought that John was talking about doing more contraband work, but now he could see that John had had a vision, and now he was starting to see, and he wanted so dearly to get in touch with John again. The only way he could do that was to actually travel to the other side of the island, or to call into Norwich and contact him from there. Without hesitation and without any regard for the time of day or how long it would take, Willie had determined in his mind that he had to repair things with John. He knew that the Broketich special would not make it to the other side of the island and back, and he was not sure there was anywhere he could moor it. So it was a case of taking out one of the large vessels, which was quite a big job for one person. Either that or he could walk back through the bush and up over the top of the mountain and head down into Norwich within a few hours. But when he weighed it all up, he knew that he needed the support of a large vessel. He knew that he needed to be able to moor off the island if necessary and to stay there for as long as he needed until he sorted things out with John. He had no idea of the depth of what he was talking about, but he knew that he had to do it. He knew that it would take him several hours to fuel up and check through the vessel to make sure everything was seaworthy and get everything working again. Just as he was about to do that, he realized that he could actually go onto the vessels and use the radios there. He wasn't sure what was happening to him, but his brain was in a little turmoil. He thought to himself, how stupid. I can just walk into the shed, take out one of the radios, hook it into our antenna system, and I can talk directly to John. But that's not really the answer to what had just come to him. He was excited about being able to talk to John, but more than that, he really needed to see him. He could picture the look on John's face. He could see his face in front of him, and he could see the smile that would come over him when he contacted him on the radio and said, I'm on the Jeremy, and I'm on my way to see you. The Jeremy was Willie and John's most precious possession, and it had actually disappeared into the background when they had their disagreement, and neither of them had gone near the boat since that time. The Jeremy was a result of their joint efforts. It was where they put their whole investment from the older fishing boats. The Jeremy was around about the same size as the Michael, but had larger engines, better facilities, bigger pumps, larger winches, and the most exclusive accommodations. Willie and John had planned to use the Jeremy to go to the mainland and to do exclusive business there. Even though the Jeremy looked like a fishing boat, it was actually a pleasure cruiser, though a lot bigger than a normal pleasure cruiser. When Willie and John had their disagreement, the life seemed to go out of the Jeremy, and it no longer got used and never performed the same way again. It never had the same feeling again. So occasionally they used the Michael, but they never used the Jeremy. The Michael was their original fishing cruiser. It was a large boat also. It looked very similar in lines, but it was a workboat, and it took heavy loads and handled heavy seas. It took on cargo that you would not put on the Jeremy. It was a rough and tough fishing boat, but well looked after. Whenever John wanted to do some heavy work from the other side of the island, he used to come and get the Michael, but the Jeremy had sat there for some time. Willie was not even sure that the regular maintenance had been carried out on the essential services, so he knew there would be a few hours in getting everything underway. Even the winches and the mooring equipment had sat there for some time. Willie was confident, though, about everything that was in the shed. It was well greased and well looked after and well preserved. He knew that the boat would go down the slides without any problems at all. All he had to do was check around the sea valves and check around the rudder and the seals and to make sure everything was okay on the outside of the boat. He also needed to check the same from the inside and make sure there was fresh water on board and that nothing was contaminated. He needed to make sure the oil and fuel were in good condition as well. Willie had all of the facilities he needed in the shed, and if necessary, he could pump the stored fuel overboard into a recycle area that they had established for themselves so they could use dirty fuel. Willie knew that he could do everything and get underway by himself, but he would have to test for the first time his own remote controls, because to move a large vessel like that with one person was almost impossible. He knew, though, that the remote controls he had set up should do the job. The excitement grew within Willie as he put on his wet weather gear and ventured out into the boat shed to get on with the job. To launch a large boat without having the engines running and ready to move away from the launch area was rather difficult. It was essential to have cooling water available for the vessel so that the engines could run, and that was not possible unless the boat was in the water. So Willie had set up some flexible piping with special snap lock fittings that would disconnect as the boat moved into the water and wind themselves back up into the shed as he moved away. He had also arranged a remote control for the winch and for the disconnection process to let the Jeremy move into the water. It was quite complex yet simple in the way he had set it up. So when Willie had checked everything out and it was all in order and he had replaced the drinking water, he was ready to go. As the large doors opened and the boat shed opened up, Willie pressed the button to start the winch, lowering him and the boat into the water. As the boat rolled down the rails, he felt the sensation that he had felt many times before, a satisfaction and a joy in feeling the results of his many hours of labor. As the boat touched the water, Willie heard the clang, and he knew that the pipes had disconnected and the engines were running cool and everything had worked the way he had expected it to. As the boat sank deep into the water, he felt it lift off the cradle, and he quickly engaged it in reverse and kept the motion going out into the ocean. It was not possible with the size of the boat for Willie to run around and look and see where everything was. He had to stay at the controls and judge exactly where the vessel was positioned. It was not a difficult task, but it was an art, and he moved with ease as he controlled the large boat and took it out away from the boat shed. Once he was safe and in relatively deep water, he tested his radio control on the boat shed doors. He had figured that if the doors didn't shut, he would have to moor the boat and take his high-speed rubber dinghy back in to close them. He almost cheered when he saw the doors start to move. The radio system that he had used was from an old, broken radio out of his small fishing vessels that had long since gone to the bottom. It tested okay in the shop, but he had not been sure that it would work okay from outside. Sure enough, everything worked perfectly. Willie checked his controls and settled back in the skipper's chair and allowed the Jeremy to take over and navigate its way out into deeper waters and set a course for the other side of the island. Many people would have had considered it dangerous to run a vessel of such a size with only one person, and Willie laughed to himself when he thought about that. He thought about how awkward he had felt the first time he had done just that because of what everybody had said. But with the automatic controls that he had on board, it was like having 15 people there, even though there was only one person. He could set anything he wanted to do, whatever he wanted, and he could even steer the boat with his small remote control. He could actually moor the vessel alongside by walking down along the gunwale while steering the boat. He also had another small control for the throttles, though he had a little bit of a problem with the two controls. He could only use one at a time. He thought he was a little bit behind the times, as he felt the whole lot could not be in one unit, but he couldn't get anyone to do what they had wanted. So they had two separate controls, one for throttle and one for steering. The only problem was if you placed them close together, they interfered with one another. So it took a while to get used to the fact that if you were going to change the throttles, you had to quickly switch off the steering to operate the throttle. Willie had become quite an expert at it, but John had a lot of problems with the two. When they were together, they would have one each, but by himself, Willie was an expert. He knew that during every stage of his trip ahead, he could handle every operation. It was around a 4-hour trip to get to the other side of the island and rather difficult to get around some of the coral reefs, but he had done it many times before, and most of it was programmed into the automatic pilot and the onboard navigation system. Much of the navigation system that was on board the Jeremy had not been seen in that part of the world. It was the type of thing that you would see only on a very expensive pleasure cruiser or on a naval type vessel. The Jeremy had built to actually outrun naval vessels anyway. So although there had been a little bit of unethical principle behind the Jeremy initially, it had become their special project. Every moment they had, they focused on what else they could do for the Jeremy. And now that Willie was back out in the water, he knew beyond doubt that he had to go and make things right with John. He knew that he had to start up the Willie and John Broltage team once again so that the boat shed, which displayed the title Willie and John Broltage, would also show the Broltage special, and it would also involve young Bill Summers in some way or another. The whole business would become open and honest and would expand internationally. Willie had no idea where all this came from, but somehow it had been tied to his connection with Bill, and he had excitement and determination in his heart that he had not felt for a long time. The weather had turned into something of a picture. As Willie looked out to the horizon, he enjoyed every moment of the trip. When it came time to eat, Willie picked up his small transmitters and headed off down to the galley. It was an amazing setup. They actually had cameras that fed back to two separate screens in the galley and mess area so that they could look out and see what was going on outside, the same as you would have if you were on deck. Even those had a remote control, each to allow you to pan around and look at the sky and the sea and to look forward and aft. Willie used to love to sit at the table with all of these gadgets around him. While he was eating, he would flick backwards and forwards and have a look at where they were going, and then flick down to the map, see that the autopilot was active, check the radar, all automatically. It was like a game, and there was Willie in the midst of eating, with the kettle boiling and all of his gadgets running. And that ends chapter 40. And I will come back and continue with chapter 41. Until then, I wish you a perfect life, perfect health, and a magic future. Thank you.